This is the first of probably 4 or 5 videos that I've done after doing some research into electrical code, antennas, lightning protection, and of course having seen the beliefs, education, and practices in amateur radio over the decades as far as antenna systems and grounding for lightning. The National Electric Code is a top-level 30,000 foot view legal and technical reference book. It's more or less incorporated as maybe administrative law. I'm not a lawyer, but there it is. It is enforceable in court. It's not a hobbyist handbook, not an option. It's intended that people and property don't get damaged and don't get killed and damaged. Unfortunately, after getting some engineering education and experience, and after having worked on a nuclear preliminary design project where I sat in front of the engineers that did the lightning protection for that nuclear facility, I got a view of what really goes on behind the scenes, especially with regard to lightning protection. It is very complex. It deals with electrical physics beyond hams, beyond electricians, beyond hobbyists and homeowners. It's very complicated, and it is not in this book. This book says nothing about the design and construction of lightning protection systems except to reference them, incorporate by reference. Yes, there are some vague mentions of lightning in here, but for an example, Article 800 in the back of this book, which covers amateur radio and CB radio antenna systems, says absolutely nothing about what hams commonly claim, that we must ground antenna systems for lightning. It's not in there. It doesn't exist. In fact, it's a contradiction in terms, and I'm going to explain that later. There is no such thing. This is not a hobbyist handbook. It's not an electrician's handbook. Hobbyists and electricians will have only a very superficial knowledge of this book. They'll be able to cite some trivial facts like a 5/8 ground rod 8 foot long. But beyond that, this book is so detailed, so vague, and requires engineering and maybe some legal knowledge that's beyond the electrician. This is not a field guide for electricians, although some of them use it for that. Right up front, in the first part, Article 90, under NFPA, National Fire Protection, who this book is stated for is stated, or who this book is intended for is stated. Article 90.1, Purpose. Subparagraph C, Intention. The code is not intended as a design specification. We do not design electrical systems or grounding systems by this book, or an instruction manual for untrained persons. With extremely rare exception, all amateur radio operators are untrained persons, and this book is not for us. This lightning protection, grounding, lightning transients, electrical power utilities, none of that is an amateur radio education. It's an entirely separate and very complicated field. And being a ham and reading misleading, incomplete, and false information on this topic from amateur radio sources is not training. What this code covers is stated. 90.2, Scope, public and private premises. That includes our houses. 3, installations of conductors and equipment to connect to the supply of electricity. That means utility power in general. So in theory, if we put an amateur radio station in a house, run it off mains power or commercial power, then presumably our amateur radio stations would fall under this code. What's not covered is installation of communications equipment under the exclusive control of communications utilities, installations under exclusive control of electric utility, in other words, entities that are not public entities that have people that should know what they're doing and don't need this. I sat in Washington State one day and watched an employee of a cable company come out and commit a gross code violation by taking the coax from a antenna, I think it was a dish, and use nylon ties to strap it tightly against the conduit from the weatherhead to the meter box. That's a potential fatality. I didn't say anything to him because it had been a waste of my breath, because he's absolutely clueless. But it's inexcusable. I'll leave it up to you to figure out why it's dangerous to have 3 conductors inside a conduit that can source tens or hundreds of thousands of amp of fault current and tightly strap a piece of coax to it. Think about that over coffee this morning. The general belief and practice in amateur radio is to put up an antenna as high as possible, as big an antenna as possible, connected with a transmission line which very often goes to the ground literally, and oftentimes to the ground and back up to the ham shack, or sometimes they will go above ground through the air directly to the ham shack. All mine go to the ground for a reason. That just made a much better lightning rod than a lightning rod. And the common belief and practice is that in order to protect the station from lightning, we must ground the system. That sounds good, but the end result is several gross code violations and creating a possibly dangerous or possibly deadly problem in the ham shack. I'll explain that in some detail later. But essentially, all of amateur radio practice and belief regarding this topic is a code violation. And hams will swear up and down that they know all about this and that they're right. There are some of them that go on road tours and teach lectures and pretend that they're experts on this topic. But none of them are engineers in this topic, and you'll notice their presentations probably do not include showing you this code. I've known a couple of such persons. They know nothing about the code. They're citing opinion, and unfortunately that opinion is a code violation and can be dangerous. The lightning is a completely separate topic from what this book covers, and that is design, installation, operation, and safety on mostly 60-cycle commercial AC power systems. This book is not, I repeat, not about lightning and not about lightning safety, and those topics are not in here. So right up front, any information, any presentation that pretends that this book is false. Just assume up front that it is. The problem comes by assuming that lightning is just DC. Lightning is anything but DC. Lightning is high-speed RF transient. One of the pioneering works on this topic was a book on formation of arcs, arc discharges, and branch streamer theory by Townsend, Townsend, back in the late 1920s, I believe it was. That book describes the formation, discharge, propagation, testing of arc discharges. This came about the time of spark gap transmitters. Interestingly enough, lightning discharges and sparks we can make in ham shack are very much the same thing. They are not DC, they're not 60-cycle AC, they are radio frequency. And nothing will propagate them better than our antenna systems. A lightning rod's not tuned. A lightning rod coming down to a ground rod by a piece of cable is a very poor conductor for a lightning transient because of inductance. A number 6 wire, 100 foot long, is essentially an open circuit to lightning. It may as well not be there. and that's because of self-inductance of the wire. In general, not only is there nothing in this book about lightning protection, but the entire premise of grounding antenna systems for lightning in amateur radio and CB stations, specifically in Article 800, does not exist. There is not one word in this book anywhere, and I've read the whole thing. Not one word in Article 800 covering amateur radio stations. Not one word requires grounding antenna systems for lightning. Not only is it futile, but it makes it worse. It just invites a lightning discharge. The old adage that lightning comes down from above and up from below is correct. It's oversimplified, but it's fact. If we put up an antenna on an insulating pole, or just imagine it's suspended in the air 100 foot up, then connect it to the earth, that allows a transfer of charge from the ground up. And that just meets a discharge channel that's building from the cloud, meets it part way up. You want to make it worse? Make it a sharp point. So for an antenna on a tower, the tower is grounded whether we like it or not, whether we intend it or not. It is a lightning rod. There's no way around it. For an antenna such as a dipole suspended by trees, you want to make it worse? Ground the feed line. You just made a dandy lightning rod. In fact, I'm in ham shack right now. Radio equipment, some sloppy cables on the floor. There's a cable entry. No ground wires. I had grounded this station, got to thinking about it, and thought about why that's a bad idea. And I was able to draw circuit diagrams of scenarios where that would actually make it worse, so I took it out. I have no trouble with RF here. I have no trouble with lightning strikes. When there are storms around, I disconnect equipment. The old beliefs and practices on controlling RF, there's RF in the shack, there's RF on the equipment by grounding, is futile. That's a different topic. That's universally because of high SWR on antenna systems. Grounding it does not eliminate that RF, it just changes where the fields are. The answer to that problem is to fix the antenna system. Don't believe that? If you got a shack with RF problems, go out, disconnect the antenna, put a dummy load on it. I guarantee your RF problems will disappear. End of video 1.